we got to talk about Donald Trump just for a second. I don't like talking about it. We got to talk about it just for a second because your boy is slipping in the polls. He's been slipping for a while, but now he's also slipping in them TV ratings, and you know it's eating him alive. He's a ratings killer now. How does that feel, Donald? You are terrible. A complete disaster. Nearly 22 million people tuned into the DNC, the Democratic Convention, but only 19 million people tuned into the RNC. Now, 19 million ain't bad, but Donald Trump loves to have the biggest show on earth, and it turns out he didn't. And anyway, with that many eyeballs on the DNC, there was an opportunity to do something special, to get even more support, to galvanize the people who were uncertain or, as we know, uncommitted. They could have unified the Democratic Party, but Democrats never miss an opportunity to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Instead of widening the tent, doing the right thing, taking the principal position on the Middle East, specifically on Israel-Palestine, they decided to deny a Palestinian-American a speaking slot. I'm talking about Georgia State Rep Ruwa Romman. She's a Palestinian-American. She's also a Democrat. And she joined them uncommitted delegates who were protesting outside of the DNC. And it was interesting because even though the Democrats shot themselves in the foot and did not let her on that stage, she still shared some of what she would have said had she been allowed to speak on the big stage. Take a listen.
Especially hard as we've been moral witnesses to the massacres of Gaza.
Let's commit to each other, to electing Vice President Harris and defeating Donald Trump, who uses my identity as a Palestinian as a slur. Let's fight for the policies long overdue, from restoring access to abortions, to ensuring a living wage, to demanding an end to reckless war and a ceasefire in Gaza. To those who doubt us, to the cynics and the naysayers, I say yes, we can. Yes, we can be a Democratic Party that prioritizes funding our schools and hospitals, not for endless wars.
That's right.
That fights for an America that belongs to all of us, black, brown, and white, Jews and Palestinians, all of us, like my grandfather taught me, together.
Beautiful words, beautiful speech, powerful speech, and a squandered opportunity by the Democrats. But again, that's what they do a lot of times. But anyway, a lot of people ain't going to hear it. And a lot of people aren't going to vote for Kamala Harris because of her commitment to Israel. She made it very clear after the DNC and before the DNC through her words, her direct words at the convention, but also through her aides, that they're going to keep funding Israel. They're going to keep sending weapons to Israel. She did, though, add that Palestinians deserve freedom, safety, and self-determination. Freedom, safety, and self-determination. Those are big words. That third word, self-determination, is huge. But it only matters if it comes with a plan, if it comes with a policy, and it comes with political will. Because otherwise, you can say self-determination. We've been saying self-determination for decades. We've been saying self-determination certainly since Oslo. But none of it matters if you don't have the power to make it happen. One of the ways to get the power to make it happen is when you have a mandate from the people. How do you get a mandate from the people? By getting the uncommitted voters to jump onto your boat, to get the uncommitted people to speak out. Now, if you're an uncommitted voter, or if you're a person who said, nope, I'm not pulling the lever for Kamala Harris no matter what, you are now in an interesting space. Some people are patting on your back for your courage. Some people are rewarding you or applauding you for your moral courage and your political clarity. Other people are saying, you might have this thing messed up. Well, that's what I want to talk about, right? Does the third party vote actually help or hurt the cause of Palestine worse than, say, a non-vote? I got somebody here who knows all about voting, knows all about foreign policy, knows all about global affairs. She's a dear friend and former colleague, and just a wonderful, extraordinary human being. Her name is Nayyera Haq, and she is a journalist. She's a host on Sirius XM Radio. And you also see her on them cable news channels all the time, adding some clarity and sense. She's also the former White House senior director under the Obama administration, under Obama's administration. She's also served in the State Department and the U.S. Treasury. Basically, she's had every good job in the world. She has all the brown jobs. Nayyera, good to see you.
I mean, listen, I was the man for a really long time. So I'm doing my penance now for it.
Understood. Well, you are paying it forward or paying it back quite
Right.
generously and quite beautifully. I appreciate you telling the truth to the world for us. But talk to me about this third party thing, because it's an interesting phenomenon. A lot of people are saying, look, the best way to leverage our power is to vote third party. It's what I've done in the past. Because if we vote third party, then they know they can't take our votes for granted, and they're going to have to get pulled to the left, similar to what the Republicans did with the Tea Party and all that other stuff. They pulled the party to the right, and they got their Donald Trump for it. What do you say?
Yeah, so the Tea Party was actually movement within the Republican Party, right? They staked out a position that was more extreme than the mainstream. And that's what the uncommitted folks were doing. They staked out a position within the Democratic Party structure. So they had access to the power brokers. They had, a channel and something that the power brokers needed. And that's where the negotiations started. The challenge with third party voting, while it feels very good and it feels like a protest vote, none of the third party candidates have access to power right now. So when you're looking to actually influence the policy, which third party person is able to do that or has had a track record of doing that? So I look at it as a sense of idealism and feelings versus deep pragmatic reality of what the machine is of the Electoral College, which let me level set here. The system is clearly broken when the majority of the people speaking isn't how we actually elect the leader of the country. So I've spent a significant amount of time trying to understand how the system works and how choices actually get made. So that's the perspective I'm bringing. I'm not saying that this is how things should be. It's just the sad reality of how things are.
So help me make sense of this, because particularly here at night school, my audience is going to say, wait a minute, this sounds like a mainstream Democrat just trying to tell me not to waste my vote. First, there's the moral argument that would push back against what you're saying, right? And that is to say, I can't support genocide. I see genocide happening, and I'm watching my country underwrite it. I'm watching my country fund it. I'm watching my country sanction it, either directly or indirectly. And from the moral perspective, I just can't do that. That's what a lot of people here are saying. But the second piece of it is, if we don't do it, if we withhold our vote, then we get the ceasefire. The leverage isn't once she's elected. The leverage is before she's elected, right? That if we hold our vote now, just the threat of a third party vote will pull her to the left. Or if she loses because of the third party vote, then the next time around, they will have learned a lesson and they will deliver our needs. What do you say to that?
Yeah, the challenge comes in is that's a theoretical calculus, right? In theory, right? It's a moral argument about a personal feeling, which, by the way, totally respect, right? I get that. And people need to feel good about how they're casting their ballot. But while we're feeling good about it, that other side has been operating a machine and machinations to deprive us of our rights and access to the ballot and all sorts of things, right? They think about it in a very machine kind of way. When you look at that machine, the choice that they're making is, okay, if you're not with us, you're against us. That is their very deeply pragmatic thing. So if you think about what role you want to play there, I think that's a question for potential third-party voters to ask themselves, is what does it mean to be with or against? If the assumption is we will third-party vote in such a significant way that you will feel our power and fear us.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, the fear ended up in George Bush and the Iraq War. Right? That's what it really ended up in. And it ended up in Donald Trump. And here's what I mean by that. It is not, people are not choosing between, a Republican, Democrat, and ideal. Those votes have to be cast and have to be divided among who's actually on the ballot. So if there is no third party vote, then those get divided between the Republican or the Democrat. So the third party pulls from one or the other. Right now, you have Bobby Kennedy and all of his anti-vaxxers and, brain worm people supporting Trump. So those are no longer a separate thing. They're definitely in the Trump bucket. So what is the Kamala Harris bucket missing versus the Trump bucket? That's the totality of where things are. And I can't tell you that any of the third party people, while they may say certain things and give you all of these folks are saying things. I can't guarantee you right now that any single one of these people who's running for elected office is going to actually follow through on what they're saying. Look at their donor lists, look at who's on their staff, look at the events they go to, where they go to. That is a much better way of understanding who actually influences every single one of the candidates.
I think that's right, but I think the third party strategy is not contingent on the third party candidate following through. It's about the power of the movement, right? I voted for Jill Stein multiple times as a Green Party member, and and people come to me all the time and they say, well, what if, Jill Stein this, Jill Stein that, and there are legitimate critiques to be made of Jill Stein, although I think many are unfair. But to me, the legitimacy of the Green Party movement or the vote doesn't hinge on her being a potentially good or bad president.
Here's what I think, and this is the key part, Mark, that I'm so glad you drilled down on this, which is the difference between a movement and a specific election, right? The idea of I'm going to do a protest vote in a period of time where 10,000 votes could change the balance of an entire state. Now that's power, right? That's power in a place like Michigan and Florida, where
Absolutely.
just a couple thousand, right? A couple thousand votes can make all the difference. But then realize how you're using your power. That's all I'm saying. Protest voting in a place like Maryland or New Jersey, where everything is blue anyway, can be, in that sense, something that is speaking to your soul, but not necessarily impacting the binary result. The third party vote.
The party doesn't care either. Like for example, if I get 100,000 people in California to vote Green, Kamala Harris isn't going to give a damn. She's going to be like, I won. If I get 100,000 people, or if I get 1 million people to vote Green in Texas, she's also not going to care because she won't go win Texas anyway. But if I get them to do it in Michigan or Pennsylvania, now everyone's eyes are open. That's why they're contesting Cornel West so intensely in Michigan, because they know that it only takes 20,000 brown people, 10,000 college students, 50,000 Muslims, whatever the calculation is of demographic, sort of layers who are saying, look, we don't want to support Kamala Harris, and just like we didn't want to support Joe Biden, they know that he could help them lose. He could help the Democrats lose. Yeah. So I hear you on the protest, right? And I have advocated in the past.
I think there's more effective ways to protest, right? I think there's far more effective ways to protest and to participate and to alleviate suffering than thinking about your vote as the only place to do that. This is why there's so many other things to do in being progressive and being an activist.
Yeah, but take me back to the movement building thing, because I think a lot of third party voters, myself included, we don't see ourselves as just making third party votes at least when I've done it in the past. I haven't done it just to protest. I believe that there was a movement we were building. I believe that we could get the 5% of the election, of the votes, so we could qualify for federal funding. I believed that we could generate. I didn't think we could win. I didn't think Cynthia McKinney or Jill Stein or whomever was going to win that election. But I thought at the time that if we continue to build and grow, in 10 years, 20 years, maybe we could have a candidate. But you can't win the election until you lose the election. Yeah,
and also, why are you playing not to win?
Well, I think you're playing to win. It's like sports, right? Like you're not going to go 82-0, right? But you got to learn. You're going to lose some games, but you learn how to play together. You develop until you're ready. You want to win the big one. I think you go as hard as you can, but I think you also have to be practical too, right? Like we're not going to run.
And that's the thing. That's what I mean. The building a movement is a year-round process. Presidential elections is a really messed up version of looking at very, very specific groups of people and how you influence them in very, very specific counties and states, right?
I agree.
And that's and it ultimately does come down to who's going to win. So in that case, that 3 to 5%, we already know there is no third party candidate right now that is going to qualify for federal funding or be able to win this election. At this point in time, with 70 days out, a third party candidate has power to the degree that they can impact one of the major two parties. That's what Bobby Kennedy, he cut his deal, probably get a cabinet position out of it. Right? He's like, I'm going to bring my voters over, right? So what are you going to use the power of what you have in this moment to do? Or are you going to ride it out for some potential movement building in the future that may have to happen under a Trump administration? None of these are great choices. It is just the reality of what we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, no, they're all tough choices. And I think my hesitation to vote third party this time has come around the fact that I haven't been as satisfied with the movement building part that took place in 2016, right? But I've seen other movement building actions happen in other places where people are saying, like, for example, the Working Families Party is saying, we're going to build locally, we're going to fight for mayoral elections and council seats. And then in 10 years, when we have potentially in 10 years, when we have enough strength, then we'll make a hard run at presidency.
And that's the difference between local impact versus presidential muckety muck, right? And I think so many, particularly a lot of folks from the Muslim American community, folks that I know, my family coming up, get lost in the presidential because it's so ever present. But it is actually the thing, right? Yeah. But it's the thing that actually least affects our day-to-day lives. And everybody who is running for president right now, everybody on that stage at the DNC had some deep local roots to some state or another, right? And so the local that's the movement building. AOC, back in 2016, nobody was giving her the stage, let alone a standing ovation. She built a movement and she built local coalitions to help her advance, granted, in an establishment party. But that's how she took that.
The critique of AOC is she grew and she built the movement and she built her stature, but she did so by capitulating. That she's now carrying the water for Joe Biden, saying the president is working hard for a ceasefire every minute. He doesn't sleep at night. He's flipping over in his bed.
She hasn't done that. She hasn't carried the water for him on. She's been very critical, right? Like, you could do a little bit of both, right? Bernie still carrying the water for Kamala, and just today said absolutely you need to have conditions on all the aid, all the military aid. So this is where the internal tussle and the internal discussion, you can move that again, depending on which team and which group you're part of. That's again, this is a theory of the case, but hands down, the Democratic Party today is more left than it was certainly within the Obama administration.
I think that's right. Let me ask you one more question for you. Would you feel differently if the candidates were more similar? For example, if it were Joe Biden running against Mitt Romney, would you then feel comfortable with the third party vote?
Yeah, I think some of what's gotten complicated in this one is that there's this feeling of identity on the ballot, right? This identity of American democracy, which has been hit hard, but then also the identity of, Kamala Harris could be my daughter, or my daughter could be Kamala Harris, all of that. And that's the emotional piece that gets really tricky to untangle and say, but wait a second, what are the actual policies that we're supporting? And campaigns are designed to appeal to your emotions.
Absolutely.
What I say at the end of the day, right? They're designed to do that. At the end of the day, look at the ballot. These are the choices, and it's a deeply, deeply pragmatic game. I save a lot of my idealism for what I'm doing with my family, what I do with my students, what I do in my local community, and I am ruthless when it comes to elections.
And I think for a lot of people, to your point, if the stakes are high and the gap is huge, you got to be practical. But and I think a lot of people are concerned that every election, every Democrat tells you that every Republican is the worst person ever and that the sky is falling.
Yeah, and that's a big that's a big problem the Democrats did. Everything was like, oh my God, hair on fire. Right. And you're like, you're all equally oppressing brown and black people. So why?
And that's the challenge, Nayyera, because for a lot of people, I think they're walking away saying, well, you're telling me, Kamala Harris is our best chance for a ceasefire, but it's Joe Biden and Kamala Harris that have funded the genocide in the first place for the last 10 months. So, Trump, my personal opinion is that Trump is qualitatively and quantitatively worse than Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, even on the issue of Israel-Palestine.
Yeah. I mean, well, you could directly point to the emboldening of Netanyahu as a prime minister to when Trump decided to give him Jerusalem as a capital. Be like, oh yeah, Just take that. That's going to be the capital. Forget about international law. And Trump turned his eye to the incursions into the West Bank. All stuff that may sound really nerdy and detailed, but was not happening under an Obama administration. In fact, Obama's told Netanyahu to get lost and don't show up in the country. So,
well, the thing is, but I think a lot of it was happening with Democrats at least pretending to kick and scream. But the settlement expansion still had.
I didn't say that they couldn't do more. I didn't say they couldn't do
more.
Enough. I'm looking at what actually was done.
Fair enough. No, I know you're not defending them. I guess what I'm saying is, at the end of the day, there are a lot of people who say, even when we vote for the Democrats, it's still really bad. And so let's stop pretending that somehow Democrats are going to make the conditions in Gaza or the West Bank or Lebanon or Syria or Iraq or Congo or Sudan. Like, it sucks everywhere, no matter who's president. Yeah. So maybe at this moment we can leverage our power to do something different. And again, I'm not confident. My calculus is different. My calculus is Kamala Harris is probably going to be as awful on Palestine as Joe Biden was, as Bill Clinton was, as Obama was, with a tiny asterisk, as everybody's been for decades, right? And so I can't make my vote hinge upon foreign policy, because it's
so hard though, Mark, because we do see people, and we've experienced this, right? Like one issue voters, the pro-life, anti-abortion voters, right? They created a movement. They created a movement over decades to overturn federal law and legal protections. But they did it by being deeply, deeply ruthless and working within one system and one party to take it over.
Yep.
Right. So you can be a one issue voter, but then you got to really think long, really think hard, and work within the structure. If you're not going to be a one issue voter, I think it's a little easier. But
yeah, but here's the problem. But here's the problem, Nayyera. The Republicans have always made it clear that they are willing to listen to the pro-lifers, and they're willing to, set shit on fire for the pro-life. No pun intended. I mean, metaphorically speaking, although the 80s were ugly. On the Israel-Palestine issue, Democrats have made it very clear that they're more Zionist than Netanyahu, right? If you're a sitting president right now, Joe Biden says, I'm a Zionist, right? If you have a vice president who says, I believe in Israel's right to defend itself, right, and its right to exist, which from my interpretation, I'm not speaking for you, but if you say I believe in Israel's right to exist, what you're saying is, I believe in Israel's right to exist as a Jewish ethno-state. And when you say Israel's right to defend itself, you're arming them to the teeth to continue to police and repress Palestinians. So for me, I don't have an issue with staying in a party and loading the ballot box until they move the other way. But Democrats have made it clear. Joe Biden literally would probably still be running for president if he took a more principled position on Palestine. He had no wiggle room.
But that's the whole point then. I mean, that just proves your point, is that when individual leaders are not in the Democratic Party are not responsive to what are clearly movements that are building, they are forced to step aside, or there is some, I know this is not the kind of accountability people want, right? But like the accountability, Joe was pushed aside because coalition wasn't going to hold for him. Now that coalition that Democrats need to win is younger, under the age of 45, women, people of color. And looking at that demographic, Gaza and a different view of what supporting Israel could look like has been very prevalent. However, it's a coalition. So when you give them a Kamala instead of a Biden, you give them the identity and all of those other good feels, can that coalition still hold? And I think what we're seeing is that the Gaza piece of that coalition is getting pushed to the wayside. That's the reality.
And that's my frustration. It's all hat, no cattle. It's like, okay, we push them aside, the Gaza coalition. Come on in, guys. It's safe now. All right, we got rid of Biden. It's safe now. What's going to be different? I'm going to say self-determination before funding them. I'm going to say safety before giving them Israel weapons. It's the same policy. And
I don't see in the next 5 to 10 years, any Republican or Democrat saying they're going to defund Israel or do or have an arms embargo. What the policy reach and potential is to condition the military aid and enforce international law as it has been done in other countries, right? But part of the challenge with the movements are you ask for an extreme, and that's what pushes people a little bit along the way. But because you're not getting the extreme ask, and I don't mean extreme as a judgment, I just mean it's like the outside ask, right? If you don't get the outside ask, you give up on everything else over here. The roar in that room, the roar in the room when Kamala Harris said, as the nominee, Palestinian right to self-determination, safety, and all of that, that was as loud as people cheered for her actually wrapping up her speech and like, oh my God, she's the nominee. So there is clearly a passion in something there, whether or not the people who are sitting in leadership positions recognize that in this moment, I think is different than what will happen in the next 2 to 3 years as this movement continues to build.
I hope you're right. I'm going to keep watching. I'm going to keep pushing. I'm going to keep agitating from the left, and I hope that we see a different outcome. I'm just increasingly disillusioned with the possibility that Democrats are going to give what we need on this. And again, I'm not saying that as an argument not to vote for Kamala or to vote for Kamala. I'm just saying I personally decided that the work of liberating Palestine isn't going to happen through the electoral process anyway. And so I need to consider other things simultaneously.